Mic check. Peas and carrots, peas and carrots. Passionate. Hi, I'm Ashley Daigle, and this is advice from the Cheerbrarian. Never heard that word before? That's because I smushed two words together because I felt like it. This week, we're going to do what we always do. Mix a dollop of advice to improve your life. Born from a few of my successes and a boatload of my mistakes, with the book recommendation of the week, unearthed by my voracious love of reading, from self-help to historical fiction and everything in between. This episode is going to be a little lighter on the advice and heavier on the books. As this is my last episode of 2024, I wanted to spend time looking back at the best of the best of the best books I read this year. I will give you my top 5 list as well as award some superlatives, and I even got all of my co-hosts to tell me what they read that they loved. So get a pen and paper, or I guess open your notes app, because I've got some ideas for your 2025 reading list. If you like what you hear, and I really hope you do, please, pretty please, with 2 cherries on top, tell 2 people about this podcast and send them a link to an episode you enjoyed, because direct word of mouth is huge for a little pod like mine. And now, let's do this thing. I recorded the standard intro, which I re-record every time, by the way, every single time. I'm like, voracious love of reading from self-help. Anyway, I re-recorded it and was like, this week we're going to do what we always do. And then right after that, I'm like, no, we're not. You know, that's just some authenticity for you. So like I said, this is really going to be like a best of books episode. I love at the end of the year just seeing, what did people read? What were the books that really kind of stuck out? And so I wanted to add my own voice to sort of that discourse. And so the whole episode is basically going to be unrequired reading, where I'm telling you what I read and what all my lovely co-hosts read. And I wanted to say too, you may notice, I don't ever really diss books on this podcast. Did I love every single book? Book? There's the word, book. Struggling with book already? Not good. Okay. Did I love every book I read this year? No, not necessarily. But my point in doing this podcast is I want to uplift. I don't want to tear down. So you can always go look at my Goodreads and see everything I read this year. I give star ratings. I write reviews. I'm also in Storygraph. But this space is really about, giving props and applause to the books that I love the most and the books that moved me the most, which, caveat, is highly subjective, right? It's my opinion. And I also want to say this, I can't believe this is happening, but this is the last episode of 2024, and you won't be hearing from me again until mid-January, because I'm going to take a break. I'm going to have some rest. I'm going to regroup and come back strong with some new episodes in mid-January. So get ready for season 4. And I'm about to start talking about books any minute now. I promise, any moment. But I have to say one more thing first. I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for telling me, hey, Ashley, I read that book you talked about and I really liked it. Or, hey, Ashley, your, silly video on Instagram made me laugh, whatever it is. Your time is precious. And I very much appreciate that you have chosen to spend some of it with me. So thank you from the very, very bottom of my heart. My aorta, that's part of the heart, right? You know what? I'm not familiar with hearts. We're gonna move past this part. Okay. So we're going to do superlatives first. Then we're going to get into what the co-host had to say. And then we're going to build suspense. And at the end of the episode, you'll hear the top 5 books for me this year. The reason the superlatives thing took place, because I went back, I was like, okay, I'm going to pick my top 5. No biggie. I went back and looked at everything I read this year, came up with the top 5, then redid it like 3 times. Then was like, this is too hard. I can't only talk about 5 books I read this year because I read so many books that really moved me. So I was like, I'm going to give superlatives because it's fun. I think it's fun. And then I can cheese it and still have a top 5, but talk about more books. Also, there are 9 superlatives. Why 9? Because that's how many categories I came up with. I wanted to make it an even 10. It does bother me. But my concern was if I make it 10, then when I go look at the list again, I might just find 11, which means I would have to make it 15. And then I'll just end up telling you about every single book I read this year. So like we gotta stop somewhere. So all told, we've got 9 superlatives that I'm going to go through. That's my drum roll sound. Doesn't it feel like there's a real drum in here? Okay, so here you go. So, most likely to restore your faith in humanity goes to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. So, I had previously read her Monk and Robot story, it's like a duology that, oh my gosh, moved me to tears. Two little novellas that meant a lot to me. And then when I jumped into The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, I was like, okay, dang, Becky Chambers, I guess restoring faith in humanity is like your whole thing. So this is a book about space exploration. It's set in a universe that is not ours, where humans are like a creature, but there are many more creatures. So if you like Star Trek, it's similar in that sense, except Star Trek, of course, is like humans are the center of the universe. That's not how this works. And it just, I don't know how to explain it, but her writing will just move you. And so if you're like, science fiction sounds interesting to me, then go check that book out. Also, I should say too, all the show notes is gonna have all the names of the books. Okay. So don't stress out if you miss something because you will be able to get them. Second superlative goes out for most likely to, I was going to say make you cry. It might not make you cry, but most likely to make me cry more than is appropriate while reading a book goes out to my boy Richard Osman and his book, The Last Devil to Die. Have a very strong memory of reading this while my child was sitting in the room doing something, just like periodically peering up at me as I tried to quietly sob. This is the fourth in his Thursday Murder Club series, which I'm obsessed with, every time I talk to people about it, I'm like, I can't wait to go to London to visit the characters in this book series because they're real, because Richard Osman is so gifted that he makes you feel that way. It is a cozy murder about four octogenarians who are friends, who are living life and wrestling, with aging and all that comes with that. But they're also like awesome people, and crimes happen and things kind of get tidily wrapped up. Like you kind of know that it's going to be okay mostly in the end. So, but it might make you sob. And then Richard Osman is going to be a two-timer on the superlative list. Are you surprised? I'm surprised. So he also wrote a new book that is not part of the series called We Solve Murders. And that book is awarded most likely to have to read passages out loud to other people. My dear husband was, I'll say, accosted constantly by me going, "Can I read this part out loud to you?" Which is a formality because he knows I'm about to do it unless he probably leaves the room. That book just tickled all the parts of my funny bone. It's, if you like Thursday Murder Club and you're trying to fill the like, I finished that series hole in my heart like I was, go get We Solve Murders because it has similar, not the same characters at all, not the same plot, so it's different, but the same writing where you feel like they're real people and everything is just adorable, I guess is the word I would use. So that's another cozy mystery you can take for a spin. Okay, we are gonna change the vibe. This next book is most likely to give you both the heebies and the jeebies. This is actually a graphic novel by Dirk Backderf. It's called My Friend Dahmer. And if you're like, that sounds familiar, are you talking about Jeffrey Dahmer? I am talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. So Dirk Backderf, that's fun to say, went to high school with Jeffrey Dahmer. And he wrote and illustrated this graphic novel about that experience and knowing him. And it is haunting. Like I said, it's going to give you the heebies and jeebies, but it was very interesting to read. And he's very clear in saying like, this is not, I'm not trying to paint, like he's painting the picture of Jeffrey Dahmer as he knew him. He's not trying to like tidy up the story or forgive any of that man's many sins and crimes. He's just sort of giving backstory to like how he became the murderer that he became. So that one, very, like I said, very different vibe. Now for something completely different, most likely to fill you with lightness and make you regret that you waited so long to read it. This was highly specific to me. Is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, which somehow I only read for the first time this year, which it's like over 100 years old. I don't know what took me so long. I felt like it wasn't for me. I get weird sometimes about books where I'm like, am I gonna like it? Like, I don't know. This one, I got to break it down for myself later. What took me so long, but it really like was so delightful and so fun to live in the world with these sisters and just see their experience and their beautiful, relationships with them and with their mother. And that's maybe do Dahmer and then that one after, and then really then do the Lonely Planet or the long, what is it? Jesus. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. There you go. Do Dahmer first and then do all these books that I said are light and lovely. That would be the order. Okay. I'm like so excited. I'm talking so fast. Okay. Take a deep breath in and out. Oh, that's better. Okay. We're getting there. We have a few more. So most likely to change your life, which is a bold claim, but one I stand by. That goes out to Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. So when I did an episode earlier about meditating and how that is a practice that I have enjoyed. And I thought this book was going to be like more guided meditation, but that's not what it is at all. So he has written this book to be like a month-long journey where each day he has a little meditation. So it's like 2 to 3 pages of like, here's an idea that you can ponder, that you can learn from. And I'm going to give myself the holiday to kind of rest and chill, like I said. But then I plan in the new year to just start that book over again because it gave me so many good ideas about sort of re-examining small things in life. And also, I got to be honest, I'm a little concerned Oliver Burkeman might have bugged my home because the number of days I was struggling with something in my noggin and then I picked up the book and then whatever was in the book related directly to my experience. It was a lot. So, Oliver Burkeman, if you can hear this, I guess thank you for your book. Specifically, like I was supposed to be meeting up with a friend to hang out and had not had the chance to clean my house. Now, I was going to my friend's house to hang out, but my brain's like, but should you go somewhere if your house isn't clean? I listen, this is just what the noise in my brain. And literally I pick up with a book that day and the meditation was called On Scruffy Hospitality. And the quote at the top of it said, what was it? Something like a well-kept house is a sign of a life misspent. And I was like, wow, at me next time, Oliver Burkeman. That's rude. So anyway, like I said, he's got a little quotes, he's got his thoughts in there, and it has changed my life. I'll tell you that. So it could change yours. Okay, we have 3 more superlatives. We have most likely to change your perspective. That book that I read this year is titled, it's a long title, An Intimate Family Portrait of Mental Illness in an Era of Silence. Oh, I forgot the first part of the title. I messed it up. Okay, take 2. The title of the book is While You Were Out, An Intimate Family Portrait of Mental Illness in an Era of Silence. So this one is a memoir written by a journalist who had she had a kind of a nice childhood by all, measurement and trappings, except for all of the terrible mental illness that was plaguing her siblings, her parents, and all those things. And the era of silence is because she grew up in the 60s where, people weren't really talking about things. So by all appearances on the outside, people thought they had a happy home life until like awful, awful things started to happen. And so for me, it changed my perspective. It helped me understand mental illness a little more deeply and also understand sort of what it is to care for people with mental illness. And it's actually, I live in the Midwest, and this book is written by somebody who lives like close to where I live. So that was just an interesting comparison to think about. Like, you never know what's going on with other people, even next door. So that's a heavy one, but very interesting. Speaking of heavy but interesting, we have Most Likely to Fill You with Feminist Rage. And that book awarded is Lady Tan's Circle of Women. Now, I have to say, this book, it's a good book. I'm glad to have read it. And it is very fascinating. So This book is based on a true story. So the author is Chinese American, and she found this small small book volume. There we go. Written, I think it was like in the 1600s in China by this woman who was a physician who treated women. And so from this like actual volume, she spun up this fiction story. So in that sense, it was very inspiring to read, all that this woman overcame to care for women in a time period where, women were not allowed to do a whole lot. But the reason for the feminist rage was for the representation and reminder of the practice of foot binding, because that was a key plot point in a lot of the book. And as a person who, I did an episode on running, and going for walks is one of my favorite things and I mean, I knew about foot binding, but to be reminded of this practice that like even now, I gotta move on because my cheeks are gonna start to redden. I'm gonna lose it. So that one, like I said, the book itself, it wasn't filling me with rage because it was accurate, and I understand that happened, but I don't like having to remember about foot binding because it makes me very mad that women were hobbling themselves because it was thought to be attractive to men. Okay. And we're going to end on a lighter note. So the last superlative I'm awarding goes to a book that most likely to make your heart very, very happy. And that goes to The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which has a little bit of a romance, a little bit of a, children who are scamps, a little bit of a found family vibe. And it just really uplifted me at the end of the year. So that is all of my superlatives. So now we're going to move on, and I'm going to share with you what my co-hosts said were their best books of the year, and then we'll get into my top 5. So I also have to give them a shout out. So thank you to all of you beautiful people for agreeing to join me. I started this podcast as a solo venture, and wouldn't you know it, this chatty chat extrovert actually has more fun when she's recording with a person than recording by herself. Shocking. Who knew? So the fact that I have been able to sort of mix it up and have people with me has been really fun, and I've learned a lot, and I'm so glad to have you people in my life. So thank you for agreeing to, some last minute scheduling, sometimes, every time, for dealing with me every time I'm about to record. Spoiler, I get super nervous and take 20 sips of water, and I keep vamping and talking. I don't every time. So thank you for just bearing with all of that. Because I learned, like I said, I learned a lot from each of you. So first one up, we have Latoya. So Latoya was on the episode. We talked about going outside our comfort zones. I talked about going to a naked spa. She talked about how she would never go to a naked spa. It's not for everybody. It's okay. The best book she read this year is called The Only Black Girl by Zakia Dalila. I don't know how to say it, y'all, but her last name is Harris. That one I got. Okay, so this is also a series on, I want to say Hulu. I'm not sure, but book and series. So what she said about it was, she said, for me, it speaks to some of the feelings of Black professionals, especially women of color, and both the internal and external pressures by society for acceptance and minimizing stereotypes of Black professionals. This is exactly the kind of book I like to read for me, because I want to understand other people's perspectives. So I will be adding this to my list. So thank you for sharing, Latoya. Next up, Lee. Now, I told everybody, what's your best book? She gave me 3. And I was like, you did not follow the assignment. But she was my first ever co-host. Okay. She was the guinea pig. And so she gets some extra latitude. So in her episodes, we talked about saying no to apologizing, which was a lot of fun. And she loved a book that I recommended to her. So I'll obviously be glad to tell you about it now. And one I just mentioned already in a superlative. So the 3 books that Lee said were her best this year are, drumroll please, bada 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 bada. Wow, that was bad. Okay. So she said, Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And who recommended that book to her? This gal, me. She also summed it up better than me. So she said, part Star Trek and part Firefly, this was a fascinating dive into a world where humans aren't the center of importance and other wildly different species run the cosmos. It's a fun evaluation of what makes humans human and a great thought experiment on what other types of cultures and societies might exist out there. So, science fiction. So she loves science fiction fantasy. So the other two books are in that realm as well. So the other book she really liked, which she recommended to me, which confession she gave me, which confession I haven't read yet. Here's my vow. I will read it in 25. So that book is called Moorings of a Mackerel Sky. It is magical realism at its I was going to say it's magical realism at its most magical. There we go. A beautiful story of life, love, and family set against the backdrop of a rural Maine fishing village. A must read, especially if you like mermaids. I mean, I'm sold. I'm sold, which is good because, like I said, she gave me the book. And then the last one she recommended is, I think it's is it Sabriel or Sabriel? Lee, if you're listening, tell me if I messed up. Sabriel. We're going to go with that. She said she's a sucker for a good fantasy novel, and the world and magic system in Garth Nix's Old Kingdom series is one of the best she has encountered. And she's read a lot of this stuff, guys. So she said this is the first book in the series, and it's probably her favorite of the whole saga, and it reads well as a standalone novel. So if you don't want to commit to the whole series, you can maybe try that one. All right, next up, we've got my girl Zoe, and she and I talked about saying no to immediately responding and had what might be one of my favorite moments of the season where, like, in the middle of us recording, her Ring doorbell went off and it, like, interrupted us. And then I was like, Zoe, do you have to get that right now? And she was like, I don't. And it was this great moment. It was just funny. And we also talked about how to have more fun because she's really good at that. She's super fun. So her best book of the year was Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. So this book follows two half-sisters born in Ghana in the 1700s and their parallel paths and descendants through 8 generations from Africa all the way to the United States. I read that one as well a couple years back, and I agree, it is quite good. She also said she's currently reading Wellness by Nathan Hill. She knows it's going to be up there, but Homegoing is the best one. And she also gave a bonus shout out to Happiness Falls, which, Angie Kim had her, the author, on this podcast. That's another great book. We got 2 more wonderful co-hosts to talk about. So we've got Charles. So he and I talked about running and we talked about nutrition. And so he went through his list, and the top 2 that he read this year would be Book of Longings by Sumant Kid and Song of Achilles. And so he said he'd give the edge to Book of Longings because it really encourages self-empowerment and making the best with what you can get for second-class citizens in a society, which sounds very interesting. And he said it's not a traditional book he'd choose, which is what made it interesting to him. And last but certainly not least, we have our three-peat co-host, Amelia. We talked about back-to-school energy. We talked about the perils, tribulations, and successes of being stepmoms. And most recently, as recently as last week, we talked about trying to survive the holidays with sanity intact. So her best book of the year was Untamed by Glennon Doyle, which she just finished reading. So that book explores the journey of self-discovery and breaking free from societal expectations, empowering you to embrace your authentic self and live a life of passion and purpose. It has strong female characters, thought-provoking narrative, and generally beautiful writing from an authentic point of view. I will co-sign on that ×5 because that was one of my best books of the year, whatever year I read it. I think it was like 3 years ago. I don't know. That is one that I kept that is in my library. So Glennon Doyle's Untamed will shake things up a bit for you. She has such a way with just being her true, authentic self and like challenging kind of her own demons in a way that will make you think. I found it to be great. She also liked the book, I think it's by Riley somebody, Such a Fun Age, she said was a good one, and she would probably give that the superlative of best example of how white people do not get it. And I read that book. That was a Reese Witherspoon book club pick a few years back, and she's right. Okay, we have now gotten to the moment that you may have been waiting for. My top 5 books of 2025. how did I decide? What a great question that I'm asking myself. When I went back and looked at the list, it was, what books have I thought about the most since finishing them? What books have I recommended the most this year? Which ones have impacted me and I think are going to stick with me and maybe be revisited in some way? So, one more drum roll. Wow, that's one yet. Okay. My number 5 best book of the year, which I talked about already because Zoe mentioned it, was Wellness by Nathan Hill. So that was recommended to me actually by Heidi when we talked about Strength Finders in the podcast. It is a modern story of a marriage. People who are in their 40s who are kind of looking at each other saying like, how did we get here? And it's set in Chicago, which I found interesting. And Nathan Hill is an amazing writer. It's also like satirizing the modern age. It is very, very thoughtful. So love that book. Number 4, I gave to Ink Blood Sister Scribe by Emma Torse. So that one I read for the podcast, or I read because I was trying to find a book that didn't talk about stepmoms like they were terrible. And that book has a great stepmom. It is a fun bit of magical, I guess, fantasy with, spoiler, they're sisters. It's right there in the title, who have magical powers and are trying to sort of find their way back to each other. It, is a great debut novel. And if you are a step parent or you want to understand the plight of step parents, you can check it out. My number 3 book of the year that I read way back in, I think, like when I read it so long ago that when I realized I read it this year, I was like, oh, wow, I thought that was last year. So that book is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. So that is a heavy topic. It's another fiction book. It is about a world much like ours-ish, where this like violent action sports rules the day, and prisoners can opt in to fighting to the death for entertainment. And it is very like I said, it's dark, it's violent. It will shake things up for you. And it is also filled with statistics about actual, prison in the United States and in the modern age. So he mixes up the fiction with some real facts. Like I said, it's a tough one, but it has stuck with me and I've been recommending it a ton to people. My number 2 and 1 are actually both nonfiction, which I was surprised. But when I really thought about what was the best of the best for me, that's where I landed. So number 2 is Bravey, the memoir of Alexi Pappas, Olympic runner. I've just revisited her advice over and over again. I think about it probably at least once a week, and I think I'm going to get the audio and listen to it. So that one was great. And then my number 1 book of the year by an author who I have already mentioned is Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. So I talked about his Meditation for Mortals book. Time Management for Mortals is where he really digs in and challenges sort of the assumptions that you will ever be able to manage your time, because you can't. And if you can accept sort of the finality of human existence, if you can just sort of understand, I will never get time managed. I will never get everything under control. There's not a magical time in the future where that's going to happen. You can sort of look at your time differently and how you live your life differently. And it's not heavy. I mean, it can be a little nihilistic, I guess, but it has really helped me to think about what's important to me and how I want to be. And I flip through it often and have every third page, the corner folded down. So y'all, that's what I got. Those are the best books that I read this year, that my co-hosts have read this year, that I have been so excited to share with you today. And I hope you check some of them out next year. I love a little recap because life is busy and I want you to have something to take with you. So what the heck did we do today? In this episode, I recapped a year's worth of reading, sharing my best reads of 2024, and I awarded a lot of superlatives, as well as capped off the top books my co-host read this year. I am not going to reread that robust list right now in this recap because woof, that would be boring. But the show notes will have everything, so take a peek there for the titles that moved you. But I will give one more shout out to my top 5. My top 5 books were Wellness by Nathan Hill, Inkblood Sister Scribe by Emma Tours, Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, Bravey by Alexi Pappas, and my number 1 book that I read this year is Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. Also, I had so many people tell me their best books of the year for 2024, and their own superlatives even, that I'm excited to sprinkle in those recommendations into next season's episodes. So there is more to come of great, great books. And speaking of next season, I'm taking a nice chunky holiday break, so I won't be back with any new episodes until January. I might have a surprise or 2 queued up, so don't stray too far from wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow and review wherever you pod, and join the Cheerbrarian on Instagram or Facebook by following me at the @Cheerbrarian handle. That's where you can see resource links and other goodies, and talk to me, which I would love. Now go on, get out of here. Have a wonderful holiday and rest because you deserve it. And drink more water. Okay, bye!